And we're going to get right to it. I want to talk about the president, your president, not my president, meeting with the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I guess he spoke to that group today. They have an annual meeting, and these are police chiefs internationally, thus the name. So today, police chiefs on a very large scale had an opportunity to hear the President of the United States articulate as best he could why stop and frisk would be a good thing in Chicago, based on these two men who lost their lives randomly, inexplicably, if I can get that out, for unexplained reasons, in Chicago on the north side in an area known as Rogers Park. So the president thought that it would be a good idea. And, you know, he uses every little thing involving crime, particularly in minority neighborhoods, to encourage Jeff Sessions to institute some kind of stop and frisk policy, because that will make things better. You know, I say all the time, voting has consequences for those of you who cut your nose to spite your face. And not voting also has consequences. And so we're just days away from a midterm. And if you guys are bothered by any of this, if you guys are bothered by Brett Kavanaugh, ladies, men who love ladies, if you're bothered by this Brett Kavanaugh lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court, where he could conceivably sit for the next 40 years, certainly long enough to affect your children and your grandchildren with his foolishness. If you're bothered by that appointment, you need to make sure that you register to vote. You need to go to the polls in November, and you need to take not one friend, but you need to take 5 friends with you to the polls to vote. Because when we don't exercise our rights, things like this happen. And while I'm very bothered by all of this, I talked mightily during the 2016 election about, if you don't vote during the presidential election, SCOTUS in and of itself is sufficient enough reason for you to want to vote. I see happy faces. I see hearts as you guys come on. I'm not on my laptop. I'm on my iPad again today, because the camera quality is much better. And I want you to get all of this. So I'm on my iPad, so I can't see messages, but I do see happy faces and I see hearts when they go up. So as you come into the room, just send me a happy face and a heart, if you will, so that I know that you're here. Share this on your timeline so that others can hear what we're talking about right now. But back to this voting thing. Listen. People were so upset a couple of days after the election, and, upset a couple of hours after it had been confirmed that this guy who's in the White House was going to be in the White House. And, the next day here in California, laying across the Santa Monica freeway was not the time to be expressing your displeasure. The time to do that would have been on voting day, right? So register to vote. October 22nd is the last day to do that. And I have been for many years a mail-in ballot voter, and I made sure that my 4 sons did the same thing, because being millennials, they don't understand the importance of all of this. And so I encouraged, I made them because I could. I made them complete a mail-in ballot form, so there's no excuse when it comes time to vote. You just check off a couple of boxes and off to the mail slot we go. And so that's what I did for my family. And if matters like this are important to you, you should do that for your family. Get your millennials registered to vote, folks. This stuff is going to affect them. I'm not really much bothered, to be honest with you, about SCOTUS, because listen, my childbearing days are over. And when he does away with Roe v. Wade, it's not going to affect me. But I am concerned for my children. and my grandchildren, because I have some. And so I'm concerned for you and your grandchildren, and I'm concerned for women. And if you feel the way that I do, hashtag let your vote be your protest as we go forward and as we talk about these things that are going on. So back to the International Association of Chiefs of Police, where you guys know my pet name for him, Little Tink Tink, because I don't use his real name. He had an opportunity to speak to those people today. And you know, it's funny because it was about a year ago that I was on CNN. And for any of you who want to hear what I had to say about the IACP, please go to YouTube, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, and look up my video where I was asked on YouTube what it is that I thought about what the president last year had to say about all the things that are going on in minority and poor white communities as it relates to police and community interactions. And last year, the president, and I don't know who's the president this year, but last year the president apologized for indiscretions of police departments. He kind of did a Pope thing where he took one for the team for everybody and made this blanket apology. And so I felt some kind of way about that, and I had an opinion about that, like I do most things, and so I shared it with the viewers on CNN last year this time. And so here this guy, Tink Tink, he goes over there and he tells these people, and listen, we know that there are police chiefs who believe that. We know that there are sheriffs who head departments who believe stop and frisk works. We know that there are problems on police departments that are institutionalized, that are cultural, that are systemic, and what I say are top down. And when I say top down, I mean the police chief. Not too long ago, I reported and talked about a deputy sheriff, a sheriff, not a deputy, but an actual sheriff, and I believe he was a sheriff in New Jersey, who made some offhanded remarks, and the governor over there asked him to resign and step down. And I'm wondering why he didn't just fire him on the spot. I mean, why would you ask this guy to step down? And that's a whole nother dialogue that we can have about, you know, law enforcement officers who are given what I call the gift of resignation, so that there's no record, if you will, as to why that officer left a department. And we know what happens when there's no record as to why an officer left, when there's no criminality, when there's no criminal charge regarding an officer's departure. Didn't we just hear that last week from the police chief who hired Timothy Loman? One of the nonsensical reasons he gave for giving Timothy Loman a job, and for those of you who don't know, Timothy Loman is the officer who shot and killed 12-year-old Tamir Rice. And so this police chief, who was probably in that room at the IACP convention, if you will, today, gave Timothy Loman a job, and he said he did it because there was no criminal charges against him. And so why wouldn't he give him a second chance? Something that young Tamir did not have, but we'll talk more about that on Wednesday. So back to Little Tink Tink and the IACP today, and he wants to solve all of Chicago's problems, and he says he'll do it using his best words. He'll do it fast, right? Now, what he didn't say about this stop and frisk is that he wanted to do that over there in Rogers Park. Because I'm not so sure that the folks who live over in Rogers Park, you know, that 42.9% of white folks that live over there in Rogers Park, yeah, see, I'm not so sure that they're buying into this whole stop and frisk thing. But I would love to see him institute that over there for that 42.9% group. And I'd like to know what they think about stop and frisk. Because black and brown folks and some poor white folks know that stop and frisk is a problem. It's very difficult to argue with a police officer about what's reasonable in their head, because reasonable is so objective. And what's reasonable to me and what's reasonable to most of them that I'm seeing is really unreasonable. But nonetheless, having said that as a standard with this stop and frisk, any officer worth their salt, and I know this to be true, can articulate reasonableness. Now, I'm not saying when I was on the LAPD that they taught us, I'm just going to call it creative writing for now, so you'll understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that that's what they taught us. They certainly didn't teach us to lie, like they don't teach us to kill. But if every day they send me to the range and they tell me to aim for center mass, which is right here, the 10 ring, and that's where your heart is, then aren't they in effect teaching me to kill you? So when they teach me to write an arrest report, when they teach me to articulate probable cause and reasonable suspicion, it's very difficult for you, citizen, to argue what's in my head. Because if I tell you I believe it, if I tell you I perceive it, if it's real to me, it's real in its consequences. And I defy any of you to debate with me about what I think. And so when you have an officer, and we know that every officer who's on a police department, all of them shouldn't be there. There's some folks that are really ill-suited, that don't have the right temperament for that position. And for whatever reason, police chiefs just refuse to admit it. They refuse to identify these people and get them off the department. They refuse to acknowledge publicly that there's a problem. And so they put things under the rug and they minimize and they mitigate that bad behavior until something happens that's so outrageous and egregious that they can no longer shield this officer. And it's really not about the officer. Understand that. It's about that entity. It's about that organism. And so when they are protecting themselves, police chiefs, when they're protecting themselves, when they're protecting that organization, if an officer happens to get the homie hookup, okay, it really wasn't about that officer, because every police chief and every sheriff understands that at the end of a civil suit is going to be a payout. It's going to be a settlement. And know that that money doesn't come from a police department. There's a general fund set up somewhere where families who are given buckets of money because a loved one was killed by an errant officer, that doesn't affect the police department. It doesn't even affect the police officer. And I say this all the time. That kind of change is going to come with legislation, and understand that police unions are mighty and they're powerful and they're going to fight this tooth and nail. But that change needs to come through changing the police officer's Bill of Rights. Because I believe that if a police officer just had to pay 1% of a civil suit, this stuff would stop yesterday. Because know this. Police officers are no different than any other occupation. We all live paycheck to paycheck, and the police boys especially, they like their toys, right? They like to go out and get the trucks and the Sea-Doos and the motorcycles and townhouses for the times when they're with the side piece. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So let one of those officers pay 1% of a civil suit. This will break their back. There'll be a whole lot of new homeowners out there when you take over his properties, if he was held financially responsible. And so while there's so many problems that are going on nationally with police departments, there's not a one fix. There's not one thing that's going to make it right. But I know one thing that'll make it all bad is if Lil Tink Tink is allowed to institute through Jeff Sessions this stop and frisk policy. And when he said it, he understood what he was saying, because he said this needs to happen in Chicago. Now, he didn't say in Rogers Park. He said in Chicago, where all the crime is occurring, as if he really cares, because this stuff has been going on weekend after weekend, where we hear 56 people were killed in a neighborhood. 3-day weekend, 70 people were shot. And of those 70, 24 were killed. Whatever the number is astronomical. And I've opined before that there's no way that those kind of numbers would be tolerated here in California, in Beverly Hills, or in Rancho Palos Verdes, or in Malibu, or you pick an affluent area. That stuff would not be tolerated. And that's why right now, over there in Rogers Park, God bless them, I'm not taking nothing away from those people that live there, because I'm concerned about their quality of life issues as well. But right now, the ATF and the FBI are over there assisting a gang unit from Chicago and a narcotics unit from Chicago that Eddie Johnson, Superintendent Eddie Johnson, has dispatched, has deployed to solve this problem, not now, but right now. 2 people lost their lives within a few days of one another, within a mile of one another. And Eddie Johnson is commanding these kinds of resources. Why now? Why now? And so for Lil Tink Tink to say and encourage Jeff Sessions, another appointment from this administration, that because those of you who cut your nose to spite your face, y'all let this happen. And so what I want to know is, what you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Have you had enough yet? Or are you still going to continue that cut your nose to spite your face thing that's jumping off right now? Are you ready to have 4 or 5 people jump in the car with you on poll day and go vote? Because I know in certain places there's some key Senate races. There are some key mayoral races, governor races. Here in Los Angeles, Jim McDonnell is up for re-election as the sheriff over the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, which is almost as big as LAPD here in our city. You know, we really only think that there's 2 departments, LAPD and the LASO, right? In our arrogance, nothing else matters. And so LA County Sheriffs, they cover a big territory. And this guy, Jim McDonnell, he had an opportunity to come and talk to people who look like me, and he didn't even show up. So what does that tell you? So I just want to know if you guys had enough. Let me know as I'm sitting here talking to you. Just send me a quick couple of I've had enough, hashtag I've had enough. If you're ready to do something, send me some thumbs up, some hearts, and let me know that you've had enough. Because we know what happens when we leave the articulation of reasonable suspicion in the hands of an officer like Ray Tenzing, who shot and killed Sam DuBose because he didn't have a front license plate on his car. Is that reasonable?